How many slaves work for you? Being in the Western developed world in the 21st century, it was a question I never thought I would have to give an answer to. But so long as we spend money, it's a question we all have to wrestle with. Our demand for falling prices have forced cheap labor. Turns out cracking a whip and opening a wallet can look an awful lot alike. With every dollar we spend, we're casting a vote for the type of world we wish to live in, a vote that will either enhance the freedom and dignity of another or exploit them to enhance our own lives. And if it's true that 45 million slaves still exist in the world today, where are they? And why aren't we all that bothered by it? Slavery still exists, according to the Global Slavery Index, that in 167 countries in the world today, that's 85% of the nations around our globe, have slavery happening in it right now. And there are no doubt many forms of slavery, but one form that I want to talk about today is called forced labor, where people are given almost no other options and forced to work with little to no pay. You most commonly see this in labor-intensive industries, under-regulated industries such as agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. For example, many of our electronics are made with metals mined in eastern Congo by slaves and child slaves that are driven by armed gangs. Our diamonds, many of them have funded brutal wars in Angola, Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Liberia, resulting in the displacement and death of millions of people, hence the reason we've dubbed them blood diamonds or conflict diamonds. Chocolate, 80% of our chocolate comes from cocoa harvested in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. Cote d'Ivoire has a horrible problem with child slavery. Translation, the chocolate we're giving our children was made by children. Cotton. Uzbekistan is one of the world's largest exporters of cotton, and every year during cotton harvest, the government will shut down the schools, put the kids in buses, take them out to work those fields. This is institutionalized child labor on a massive scale. Take something like coffee, so what many of us are drinking right now. It's typically made harvested in abysmal conditions where farmers might get paid $3 a day to harvest 100 pounds of coffee. And there are definitely companies that are offering alternatives to these sort of practices. Two of them are what we're drinking today, Cafea and Spy House. Who knew that sitting in church would make you a philanthropist, right? Drinking coffee. It's true. But slavery, it takes on many forms, and it's propagated by the items that many of us like to buy, right? But today, as the founder of an organization that for 7 years has used clothing as a primary tool for social change, I'm going to be discussing the struggle of garment workers in sweatshops whose lives are being stolen so that you and I can get a steal on a cheap pair of shoes. These are people that are kept under social or economic conditions from which they can't escape, right? They're pretty much just slaves to this industry. I mean, when a Haitian sweatshop worker is making like $15 to $20 a month making T-shirts, and it costs $20 a month to rent a one-room shack without running water, what are we supposed to do with that? Well, I'm hoping that today we'll be able to look into the Bible, into the scriptures, and see what God suggests we do with that, and see what God's heart on this issue of exploitation is. Because as I look through my Bible time and time again, I don't see a God who's looking for pious acts of religiosity, but rather manifestations of his love through action, through policies implemented in government, business, and all other institutions. Simply put, if God so loved the world, shouldn't we love the world too? In all that we do, right? And I'm hoping today that you have a radical porch light moment, that we can flip on the switch and turn a light on to talk about things that have been in the dark for a very long time, something that very few people even know about, and as a result aren't just not talking about it, but that we could put it on the table and, as unpleasant as it is, really deal with it. And I realize that most people in here today don't know about this stuff, haven't ever heard about this stuff, and what I'm going to share with you is really going to be heavy. It's going to be really super hard to hear. I remember when I first heard this stuff, I was shocked, mainly because I never really thought about the people who made my clothing. Never, in 30-something years almost. It wasn't until I started a clothing company that I started to think about the true cost behind the items I wore. So today I'll be speaking to you not just though as a guy who's immersed in the clothing industry, but as a guy who wears clothing. And pretty sure that's all of us here. If not, that's super awkward, but that's all of us. So I'll be talking as a guy who really hasn't had it right for most of his life, and in many ways still don't have it right. I'm a guy who, for most of my life, when asked how many slaves worked for me, could not answer 0. And to be open and honest with you, today my answer still isn't 0. Many of the products I own or have purchased have indirectly contributed to the enslavement of many people that God really loves. And so later I'll share with you my slavery footprint and tell you how you can find out yours for yourself so we can take action. But what I want to do right now is I want to dive into the scriptures. I want to look at James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. I like James. He just really keeps it real. This guy, he says it straight. He's got no bedside manner. So here we go. Verses 1 through 6, chapter 5. In a final word to you arrogant rich, take some lessons and lament. You'll need buckets for the tears when the crash comes upon you. Your money is corrupt, and your fine clothes stink. Your greedy luxuries are a cancer in your gut, destroying your life from within. You thought you were piling up wealth, but what you've piled up is judgment. All the workers you've exploited and cheated cry out for judgment. The groans of the workers you've used and abused are a roar in the ears of the master. You've looted the earth and lived it up, but all you have to show for it is a fatter than usual corpse. In fact, what you've done is condemn and murder perfectly good persons who stand there and take it. I think the temptation here is to kind of, look around the room and think this is talking about somebody else. This is talking about all of us. In America, we are so wealthy. We are rich. In fact, the irony of the Occupy Wall Street movement that happened in 2011 that lashed out against America's top 1% was led by many people who, albeit unknowingly, were in the top 1% of the world. According to a recent World Bank survey, you pretty much just need $32,400 a year in income to make the cut of the 1%. Moreover, to be in the wealthiest half of the world, you pretty much just need half a used car. That's crazy. This points us, though, to a more sobering reality that the bar to enter the top 1% of the world wouldn't be so low were it not for the extreme poverty that so much of the world is enduring right now. And according to James, in this book of James, we really can't have a conversation about poverty and exploitation without also having a conversation about wealth. They're related. We have to ask ourselves how much the American dream is costing the world. Now, the critique James is making here isn't necessarily just of wealth, but the means by which it's achieved, right? He says that the groans of the workers are reaching the ears of the master, and the workers that we've used and abused. Well, for what? Used and abused for what? He tells us for piling up wealth, for living it up, for personal gain, for basically filling our shopping carts with more and finer things, for our fine clothes, as he says. Little did this first century writer know how true his words would ring into the ears of the 21st century globalized world. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but back in, I think it was 1996, back in the 90s, Kathy Lee Gifford came out with a clothing brand that was sold in Walmart for children, which, as it turns out, was made by children in Honduras working 20-plus hour shifts. She was absolutely mortified when she found out about it. It wasn't that she didn't care, it's that she didn't know. So why didn't she know? I think the answer is found within something called globalization. Globalization is just a fancy word that means that people all over the globe have played a part in the process that creates those snazzy items we wear. It's everywhere now. And because the process is no longer localized under one roof, it's much harder to detect who grew the cotton, who dyed the fabric, who stitched the fabric. Was the dye toxic on their health? Have they eaten today? We don't know these answers. And because so many people played a part in this process, it's easy for those people to become invisible to you and I, right? And this invisibility factor has led to the creation of sweatshops, where people are abused, both physically and emotionally. They're given less than a living wage, and they're forced to work long, long, long hours. And I think it's worth mentioning this too, that a major problem is that the countries themselves aren't really regulating the conditions in order to appeal to foreign investment. That's us, to appeal to us, if they know that we're willing to buy it. Now, the book of James isn't the only place where we see God's heart on the issue of exploitation. We also see it in Jeremiah. It says in it, he says, "Woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his own people work for nothing." Isaiah talks about how the plunder from the poor is in our houses. That's really sobering. Proverbs, it says that essentially how we choose to respond to this issue of poverty and exploitation is how we feel about God. It's how we're responding to God himself. Now, these scriptures have become especially relevant and poignant to me as I've delved into the clothing industry. I kid you not, being a Christian in the industry of clothing, it might be one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do. When I started Clothe Your Neighbor as Yourself, I had one goal in mind. I wanted to help as many people as possible with the profits from our orders and get my friends shoes and socks who were out living on the streets. So I didn't know much about business, but I knew this, that the more profit I made, the more I could give to people in need. So when it came time to source wholesale shirts to print on, I had one goal in mind: buy it cheap. So we started getting shirts from the beginning at about $3 wholesale and using the profits to help people. I mean, I really, truly felt at the time like I was doing a wonderful thing in the world until, of course, I realized that I was creating the poverty on the front end that I was offering to alleviate on the back end. Martin Luther King once said, "As long as there's poverty in the world, I could never be rich." Even if I have $1 billion. He said that we're woven together in an inescapable network of mutuality. Therefore, what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. He said, I can never be what I ought to be until you are who you ought to be. The stories we've heard today are from people across the globe, but many of them, our brothers and sisters, part of the body of Christ. And so long as the body of Christ's hand is bound in the developing world, we can't really go boasting of freedom in the Western world. Jesus himself said his prayer for us was that we would be one. What would the world be like if we believed that? Now, I know a lot of this can seem insurmountable, right? Like almost overwhelming. Like, where do we go from here? I assure you the action step here is not to run out of here naked. That's not it. That's not what we're doing. And it's not to feel bad either. It's to raise the standard, right? To support systems that manifest God's kingdom of love and compassion, and to call into question the ones that don't. It starts with just changing small things. Like Mother Teresa said, doing small things with great love. So I actually have a little list here for you of action steps, things that we can do with this information. First, I would say educate yourself. Go to slaveryfootprint.org, which assesses your global impact on slavery based on your lifestyle. I myself have woefully contributed to the enslavement of 31 people. And that's really embarrassing to share with you. But what that tells me is that by changing small things and by allowing Jesus to be Lord over my life, actually Lord over everything thing. I have the ability to free a very real 31 people. Second, what I would do is, as it relates to clothing or anything else, I would learn where and by whom my products were made. Check your tags when you get home. There are apps out there for when you're shopping that you can scan barcodes, apps like Boycott, and there's a lot more also. There are plenty of clothing companies addressing these issues and offering an alternative. Our organization in the fall will be coming out with a neighborhood market, which will be a sort of one-stop shop for ethically sourced brands. We're just curating a bunch of brands we believe in. Another solution, which is personally my own, is just live more simply, live on less stuff, suffocate a system of oppression by removing yourself from the driver's seat. We're supposed to live on daily bread anyway, so living on less stuff, holds back this sort of labor practice, Everyone's got a solution. Thrift is a good one too, practicing resurrection, using things that were already created, right? Now, I know that's a lot of info, so what we did is we put that on the Embrace website, actually, so you can check the website and you can see all my sources and all these resources that we talked about today. But it really comes down to this, okay? It comes down to this one question. Do I have the power to enhance the freedom of someone else? Yeah, we do. Proverbs tells us we're not to hold back good from those to whom it is due when it is within our power to act. And here's the crazy thing with this whole situation is that with this issue, there are no onlookers, there are no spectators. We live in a world where every consumer is an activist for something. May we be activists for peace. Jesus said that he gives us and he leaves us with his peace. And his peace is like nothing the world had ever seen before. The Hebrew word for peace is actually shalom, which means far more than the absence of chaos. Shalom is often used as a greeting or as a goodbye, marking the beginning, the end, the whole entire process. It isn't just peace, it means complete peace within all and for all. It means wholeness, contentment, well-being, and harmony. The book of James tells us that if we see somebody in need, we're not to say, go in peace, and then do nothing. Because see, peace or shalom, it isn't something spoken, it's something done. It's something we get to participate in now. It's the holistic, all-encompassing, beginning to end participation in the restoration of all things being made whole through his peace, which he has left with us to administer out into the world. So in the words of this ancient priestly blessing, may God bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and give you shalom. And may we, the church, as grateful recipients of this shalom in all that we do, whether with bullhorns or billfolds, turn around and take that peace out into the world. Let's pray. If you would bow your heads with me and close your eyes, and I want to pray this Franciscan blessing over you. So receive this. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you, church, embrace with anger at injustice, oppression, and the exploitation of people so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you, church, with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand and comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you, church, with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen.